afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The DC South Asian Literary Arts Platform aims to expand important opportunities for writers in Maryland and the broader DC metropolitan area to initiate discussion on South Asian social issues and raise South Asian voices. We continue to form and strengthen relationships with new artists and audiences to ultimately maximize the representation of South Asian arts and culture. So I'm Brittany Blackham, DC South Asian Arts Council's Grants Development and Fundraiser Relationship Manager. Although I'm primarily a grant writer, I also publish creative work. And so I'm excited to join you and other writers and scholars welcoming today's moderator and guest writer. And I'd like to welcome the topic of today's discussion, the presenting Perseus Kambura, from Miss India to Star Trek, the motion picture and beyond by Sherilyn Connelly. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Amber and Mala. And thank you for being here and enjoy.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, Sherilyn.
Hi, Amber.
So thank you to everyone for joining today's conversation with Sherilyn Connelly. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the DC South Asian Literary Festival for hosting today's event. Geeta and Manoj, thank you for supporting our organization and continuing to champion the rights of women across all industries. A big thank you to you too. The International Association of Working Women was established in Los Angeles in 2012. We are currently headquartered in Toronto. The association is dedicated to enhancing the status, improving working conditions, and advancing the rights of professional women across all industries, including film, television, digital media, fashion, arts, music, journalism, literature, sports, politics, business, and science. I'd like to introduce Sherilyn Connelly now. She is a San Francisco-based writer. From 2012 to 2019, she was contributing film critic to The Village Voice and a head film critic for the SF Weekly. She has written 4 nonfiction books and is currently in the process of writing her 5th. She is the author of Ponyville Confidential, The History and Culture of My Little Pony, the first Star Trek movie, bringing the franchise to the big screen, presenting Perseus Kambura from Miss India to Star Trek, the motion picture and beyond. And finally, your 4th book, Beautiful Ghosts, a queer memoir of San Francisco. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Before we get into our discussion, I would like to congratulate you, and it brings me the immense honor of presenting you with the IAW Women Award for Best Nonfiction of the Year for 2022 for your book, Presenting Perseus Kambura. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very honored. Thank you.
The book was absolutely amazing. I think the detail and the time and effort you took writing the book was just incredible. Like, I can't imagine how long it must have taken you. Before we get into any questions, however, I would like to ask if you would like to read a bit of the book for the viewers.
As a matter of fact, I would. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. So I am going to read from the prologue. The prologue is called The Minneapolis Panic. As Perseus Kambura settled into her suite at the Marquette Hotel in Minneapolis on the evening of Sunday, December 2nd, 1979, she was freaking out a little. This was the latest stop on a worldwide promotional tour for Star Trek, the motion picture, which was going to open in over 850 theaters across North America at the end of the week, including at Minneapolis' own Southtown Theater. Kambura would be in Washington, D.C. for the film's premiere at the MacArthur Theater on Thursday, December 6th, and soon thereafter, she would travel to the United Kingdom and Australia. In the more immediate future, she was scheduled to speak with writers from 2 local papers, The Star and the Tribune. Both would be over meals, though only one would be at an Indian restaurant. For now, alone in an unfamiliar city on a cold winter's night with nothing to do but relax, she was hit by the latest wave of anxiety attacks about the premiere and her career. She had always known the first Star Trek movie would be a big deal. She was a fan of the television show after all, and would have been excited about the movie just as an audience member. But the hype and anticipation was far beyond her experience. It was both overwhelming and only the tip of the iceberg. She had been told that fans were camping out in sleeping bags and some women had shaved their heads. This raised a whole host of other problems, not the least of which was, what if none of the fans recognized her with her hair? The shaving of her head had been such a media event that the first Los Angeles Times story had run the day before it happened, with the headline, "Sheer Terror for Kambata." Much of the publicity for the film in recent weeks had been about her hair. Articles with headlines such as, "Bald is beautiful for Star Trek star," "Lieutenant Ilea lets down her hair," and "Actress's clean-shaven image lands role in Star Trek movie." Today had been a long day by any measure. She appeared in the Star Trek shop at the New York Bloomingdale's from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., autographing photos of robot Ilea, while doing her best to answer questions without giving away too much of the story. She was then hustled to the airport for the 3-hour flight to Minneapolis, which gave her more time to ruminate. Her hair had grown back in and she had another movie lined up, but she was having trouble sorting out the advice she had received about sustaining an American showbiz career. When she had landed a role in the 1977 television movie The Man with the Power, she was being managed by Norma Lee, but now her manager was her close friend, Bobby Edrick, who advised Kambata against doing more small screen work. Guest spots on television were not the stairway to movie stardom, and even appearing in television specials as herself was not much better. With nothing else to do, Kambata turned on the television and flipped through channels. There wasn't much to choose from. American sitcoms, the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun, nothing Kambata's speed. So she settled on a British costume drama. Her mind wandered back to her anxieties, at least until she heard a familiar voice saying that if you enjoyed being able to watch quality programming, such as Masterpiece Theater, here on KTCA Channel 2 in the Twin Cities, please pick up your phone and... That voice. It couldn't be, could it? Kambata looked up at the screen. It could be, and it was, Cyrus Barucha. Though he hailed from Bombay's Parsi community like herself, Barucha and Kambata did not meet until London in the early 1970s, when he was a producer for the BBC and she was a fashion model. They were good friends back in Blighty, but lost touch when Kambata left for the United States. Kambata had not realized Barucha had done the same, but there he was on the local PBS station, standing in front of rows of people on telephones, asking viewers to call the number on the screen and pledge. Kambata picked up the phone and called. After apologizing for not making a pledge, she asked the volunteer to please give her name and number to Barucha. He called right back and they had a pleasant chat. She had always believed in this kind of serendipity, and seeing an old friend on television, complete with a contact number, just when she happened to be in town, soothed her nerves. It meant things were going to be all right. She related the story to the star's Don Morrison the next day at lunch. Morrison was one of the few journalists Kambata had met who knew that the first Star Trek movie was not Kambata's first film, or even her first in English. Morrison had been fond of her in The Wilby Conspiracy. But she was not there to promote Wilby, and after apologizing for circling back around to a topic she was already tired of, Morrison asked her what it was like being bald for 6 months. The article ran on December 5th as a friendly time warp, making it one of the few headlines to not mention her hair. Though Morrison did describe her as exotic, the word she'd been trying to shake for the past decade. As cordial as Morrison had been, things were a little more to Kambata's taste during her interview with the Tribune's food columnist, Will Jones. He was less interested in her exoticness or her on-screen baldness, and more in what she had to teach him about Indian food, such as how it was best eaten with your fingers. Sure, Indian restaurants in the United States provided forks and knives, but it never tasted right to Kambata unless she used her hands, which she did even in classier joints like Gypsies in Los Angeles or Gaylords in New York. And if you needed a utensil for the curry or lentils, that was what the naan was for. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks.
So let's jump into some questions.
Go for it.
Your book was so well researched, as mentioned before, the biography at the end. amazing. You have so many pages. It was so filled with details. And I've even actually looked into a couple of those for further research on Perseus. Can you tell us how long did it actually take you to write the book? And what was your writing process?
So it's hard to tell exactly at what point I started writing the book, because it kind of developed from when I was writing my second book, the first Star Trek movie, which I started in March 2017. And my research process at the time, because I was basically just researching everything about Star Trek from the 1970s through the early 1980s. And my research process is just look everywhere. Every database, and thankfully the library, I'm a librarian, and we have like lots of databases, and I pay for access to the Variety archives and newspapers.com. And I am just very, 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 very patient. So I'm able to like look at all these things and just go through them and find anything relevant. And I put it all into like a giant, Evernote document, which I have one of those for the movie, which is just every relevant reference to Star Trek in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
And they, those also ended up around 1978, 1979, ended up being references to Persis Khambatta as well. And I grew up loving the movie. I loved the movie before I knew that I wasn't supposed to. I didn't know it was slow and boring and had the bald chick, and I wasn't supposed to like it for those reasons. So I enjoyed the movie in spite of the fact that I wasn't supposed to. And so, Persis had like always been like on my radar and was always conscious of her, but hadn't really like ever focused much attention in her direction. And then so now it's 2018. I'm continuing to research the Star Trek book, and she's coming up a lot. And of course, I'm getting everything about her as well. And it was when I was reading an interview with her in Starlog in 1980, when she talks about how all the fans, basically all the male fans, were writing in asking for a picture of her in a bikini, that she was just getting and I was just like, oh, gross, gross, gross. But that was also the moment where I was like, wait, should this be a stealth Persis Khambatta biography? Oh, there's the approach I can take that nobody else has done before, is the making of the film and also her life, interweaving them and how they intersected and how one affected the other. And I pitched it to my publisher, who was like, yeah, see, here's the thing. We don't think anyone knows who she is and is going to buy a book about her. So and this is an academic publisher, so for them to be concerned about sales is saying a lot. Because the whole point of an academic publisher is that you're not concerned about popularity or sales. It's all about who the audience is. But they're like, we don't know that there's an audience for this book, so maybe do it as a separate book. Like finish the Star Trek book first, and then like maybe we'll talk about doing the Persis Khambatta book. I was like, okay, fair enough. And I removed her as much as I could from the first Star Trek movie, and just focused on, I'll get to all the stuff about her in the next book. And especially as I was continuing to read more and more what her life was like after she finished the film. But anyway, so I finished the first Star Trek movie. I turned in the manuscript in March 2019. And then I started working on the Persis book. And in addition to every reference to her I could find, I contacted the Margaret Herrick Library in Los Angeles, which is the Academy Library, the big movie archive. I was like, can you please send me everything you have on Persis, everything at all? And they sent me just like everything they have.
That's quite a bit.
A ton of stuff. Yeah, thankfully they had someone in the early 80s who was paying attention to these things and keeping a file on all the Persis mentions.
Yeah.
And so they sent that to me. And then when I was reading through that, and I was like, oh my God, she had an incredible life. She had an incredible life before and after Star Trek. And what's more, the more I talk about Star Trek in this book, the less I'll be able to talk about her life. And so where the book was going to be more about Star Trek, the motion picture, I ended up realizing, nope, this needs to be all about Persis, and only intersecting with the movie when she comes on board.
Yeah.
And so, I pivoted over to that in March 2019, and I worked on it nonstop through July 2020.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
it took quite a while.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think you mentioned now that your publisher had wanted you to do two separate books. And I think that actually worked really well because the way that you were able to go into such depth about Perseus's life, it kind of felt like the audience was able to live the life alongside her. Like we were living her life while she was living it too, like through the book. It was amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about what the ethics are like in terms of writing a historical fiction? Or about historical figures in a nonfiction setting?
The thing that I keep coming back to is, do you have proof? Can
Mhm.
you, whatever it is, like everything that happened in that prologue that I just read, I have the primary sources for it. There were like, it's mostly from newspapers at the time and also interviews where she talked about how nervous she was. I put all that together. And if someone said, prove this sentence to me, I can do that. I can like show them where I got it from. So that to me is the most important thing is everything has to be cited. Everything actually has to be based on primary sources.
Mhm.
If it's just a rumor, it doesn't count. And
Mhm.
there are a lot of rumors about Persis. There's one that's been going around these last few years saying that she was assassinated because of her support of Indira Gandhi. And there's this one guy who claims that he was like her agent for a while in the 80s, who has been like, behind this. And it's like, none of that passes any kind of historical smell test at
Mhm.
all. Gandhi was assassinated in 82. Persis passed away from natural causes in 98.
Mhm.
And there's just nothing about it makes sense in any way, shape, or form.
Doesn't correlate at all.
Yeah. So I don't mention that rumor in the book at all. I don't mention hearsay. I have never looked at her Wikipedia page.
Oh, okay.
I genuinely do not know what is on the Persis Khambatta Wikipedia page. And I do not want to know. Maybe some of it's true, maybe some of it's not. Maybe it's been updated since my book came out. I don't know, but I do not use any source that I don't feel that is not trustworthy.
No, of course. And I appreciate that in the book, you were so open and honest about it. I do believe that you did mention that you could follow her life to the best of your knowledge and the research that you did. And I think as an author, that is such an admirable quality that you have. It really allows the reader to trust you and your research and the bibliography at the back of the book. I think the evidence is all there. And then the references throughout the book, it was just amazing how much detail went into it. Yeah, why did you think it was so important to create awareness about Perseus's life and what she went through?
The most basic one is nobody else had. I can't figure that out. I don't know why nobody else has told her story. I mean, again, she was the most famous woman in the world for all intents and purposes in 1979 for a movie that nobody likes, but a movie that is still around, a movie that just got like, a shiny fan edit on Paramount Plus a few weeks ago. So she is still out there. Her face is still out there, but nobody has ever looked into her story. So there's that, but also the more I read about her life, especially everything not having to do with Star Trek, the more I empathized with her and like her ups and her downs, and the more that I identified with her. And the thing that really got me when I was doing the research, I was like, I'm so glad I get to be the one to tell her story, was when I discovered that in 1981, she got married at the gay West Hollywood nightclub, largely known at the time as a female impersonator nightclub, La Cage aux Faux.
Okay.
Yeah, she got married there in 1981 to a man. That was in June 1981 that she got married to a man that she had met there on opening night back in April, and they had continued to be regulars since then. And it's like, Persis got married in this very, very gay place, in this like very queer place during a time when that kind of queerness was just barely been decriminalized in the United States. It was still very much looked down upon. It's nowhere near as accepted as it is today.
Mhm.
She walked in there and she was like, this is my speed. I love this. She
Mhm.
walked in there and she was dazzled by it, which again, I have to assume because she fell in love with this man that she met there and she continued to keep going back there. And she got, I keep saying this as though it's the first time, she got married in La Cage aux Folles, and her mother Drew came over and was there at La Cage for the wedding. So
Mhm.
just discovering just this little bit of incredible, just like, let's face it, she was a hell of an ally.
Yeah.
In 1981, you were not a better ally than deciding to get married at La Cage aux Folles when there is nothing in the world that would suggest you would do such a thing.
Yeah, I think Perseus, she was authentically herself. She
Mhm.
didn't care what people thought. She wanted to live her life how she wanted to. She didn't let Hollywood especially influence who she was as an individual. Do you think Perseus had refused to do nude scenes in many of the movies that she was offered? Do you think that her career would have been different if she caved and went with what Hollywood wanted her to do?
Different? Absolutely, 100%. Better in any way, shape, or form? I really doubt it.
Mhm.
I really don't think so. It's for the same reason that you don't hear, not exactly the same reason, but along the lines of why you don't hear a lot about Sandal Bergman, who took the role in Conan the Barbarian that
Mhm.
Perseus turned down. You don't hear a lot about her these days.
Yeah.
And she was in All That Jazz a couple years earlier. I mean, she was in a very
Mhm.
high profile, also in a high profile 1979 film, a much better one, all things considered. But doing the nudity in Conan the Barbarian didn't really do any favors for her career. Natasha Kinski, another great example. She took the role in Cat People, in Paul Schrader's Cat People, that Perseus turned down. And that was all she was ever known for after that.
Mhm.
And Persis was aware of this. Persis very much knew this. She said this in interviews, that if I take my clothes off in a film, that's all I'll be known for.
Mhm.
And she does not want to be known for her body. She wants
Mhm.
people to see her for who she is. And yeah, to take off her clothes, that would become who she would be going forward.
No, I completely agree. I think you worded it beautifully that, just because she turned down those roles does not mean that she is better in any way. She just lived in accordance to how she wanted to. She
Mhm.
wanted to be perceived in a certain way, and she wanted to be recognized for her work and not necessarily for just a nude scene in a movie.
Yeah, it was a moral code. She had a strong moral code, but
Mhm.
she was not like prim or proper either.
Mhm.
I mean, she would not take her clothes off on camera, but she also loved dancing. She went out to nightclubs,
Mhm.
she went out to discos in 1979 and 1980 while making both Star Trek and Nighthawks.
Mhm.
She was photographed, at Studio 54. She was at Studio 54, legendary Coke Den Studio 54, a famous night where their liquor license was revoked. There's a picture of her there that night. And I love that she was there. And again, she did not drink.
Mhm.
She did not drink. So far as I know, she never did any drugs other than nicotine, and cigarettes were
Mhm.
her primary vice.
Yeah.
So she didn't indulge in those ways, but she still went out and had fun. And she swore.
Mhm.
There are documented times where she said fuck and words like that. And she wanted to do horror movies, she wanted to do
Mhm.
comedies. She wasn't like super high-minded. She wanted to do interesting, fun roles,
Mhm.
but also she wouldn't take off her clothes. And
Mhm.
that made her difficult. That was the word that was applied to her. She was difficult because she would not take off her clothes.
Mhm.
She was naked in the wrong place. She
Yeah.
wasn't naked in the way people wanted to see her. She was naked on her head in a movie that nobody liked. That is
Yeah.
like, she was not keeping up her end of the bargain as far as
Mhm.
Hollywood was concerned.
Of course. So that actually brings up a good point. This interview would not be complete if we didn't talk about how Perseus is hated being asked about her bald head. Um, why do you think the media was so concerned about the fact that she shaved her beautiful hair for the role in Star Trek?
Because she violated what at the time nobody was thinking of as the gender binary. Nobody was using that term in those days. And it's so often the case in the times before terms are used, the terms are not used because it's just the way things are. There's the way that women are, and there's the way that men are. There is, in films in particular, there is the masculine role and there is the feminine role. And if you violate that, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, right when it was getting to be a time when you could do that, things were opening up in terms of expression in films. But still, if you were a woman, you needed to take your clothes off when asked and don't shave your head. And if you're going to shave your head, people are going to not understand that was a choice that you made. And she actually thought, bless her, she really believed that it would not be a problem because she was like, I won't get typecast because I'll grow my hair back and people will forget that I'd ever been bald in the first place. But it was just such a novelty and such a violation that this woman who was not only did she shave her head, but she also had a weird accent and her skin was not especially fair. You know, she was an immigrant woman, exotic immigrant woman with a funny voice who shaved her head in a movie and then did not make up for it by taking her clothes off later on. But yeah, no, she was shocked and deeply, deeply frustrated by the fact that people, years later, in 1982, people were still asking her about her hair. And she had to tell them, you know, if I haven't been getting it cut, it would be like down to my waist by now. It's like nobody understood the way hair worked, which also resulted in strangers coming up to her and yanking at her hair to see if it was a wig or not. And strangers people would just like do this to her in public. It's like, that's how dehumanized she was. That's how little respect American culture had for her in the early 1980s, where it's like, you were bald in that one movie, I'm going to see if you're wearing a wig now. And it's not assault. It's not a violation of your personal space. It doesn't go against Emily Post. It's not bad manners. I have the right to walk up to you and pull your hair. And there are lots of pictures from 1980 of her, and 79 as well, of her pulling at her hair to show people that it's really there. And that was another way that I identified with her, because, you know, I actually got my roots done yesterday.
Oh, they look really nice.
Thank you. I wasn't fishing for a compliment, but I like what I caught. Thank you. But I almost didn't, because it hasn't happened much in recent years, but especially a lot in the 2000s after I came out. Right after I'd had my hair done, people would compliment me on my wig. And I would have to pull at my hair to prove to them that it wasn't a wig. So it's like reading the same thing about Perseus having to do this same thing. People assuming that she's wearing a wig and having to pull at her hair to prove that she's not. It's just one of the like many, many little ways that like identified with her and empathized with her. And again, felt like, okay, I'm the right person to be writing this book.
Yeah.
I'm not saying no one else could have, but no one else did it. So now I'm doing it, and no one else would have brought my perspective to it.
No, I completely agree. I do recall at the beginning of the book as well, you mentioned that some people might not see you as the most fitting person to be writing this and writing her story just because you weren't of South Asian descent. But I think the way that you have written it is so beautiful. You learned about the culture, you learned to relate to the character, to the person and what she represented. And I think that the way it was written, I keep saying, is just amazing. And
thank you.
It's really personal. And I think like your passion towards talking about it also is evident. You did bring up that Perseus did face a lot of discrimination in a variety of different ways, that she was a female and that she was South Asian and seen as exotic. In your words, what would you say is the biggest challenge that she faced in her life?
The biggest challenge was that she was born 20 years too soon. She was born in 1946, and, you know, she rocked it for the time she was there. She did a lot. She was she was the third woman to be crowned a Miss India in 1965 when she was 18. So I'm not saying 1946, being born in 1946 was inherently a bad thing for her because she did a lot with that. But if she'd been born 20 years later, or no, let's be greedy, maybe even say 30 years later, she would be coming up in an era in which it's so not weird for a South Asian person to be in any kind of role you care to mention.
Mm-hmm.
The example that I use in the book is that while I was writing the book, actually a little backstory, as you know from reading the book, is that there was some talk about her joining Charlie's Angels in 1980, the TV show Charlie's Angels, as Shelley Hack left, and she did not get the role. And a lot of people were like, well, obviously she's not going to get the role. They're not going to put an Indian woman on Charlie's Angels. Charlie's Angels is all about big, buxom, blonde Americans, and you can't have like, an exotic woman with a funny accent on Charlie's Angels. That just isn't done. And that was a whole big thing, which really hurt her career. The backlash to her turning down Charlie's Angels, I think, was actually the death blow to her Hollywood career. That was 1980. Go forward to 2019, and I am like one of the 3 people who saw the Charlie's Angels movie that year in the theater, Elizabeth Banks film. But what really struck me while I was watching it is that the main character, the protagonist, the audience identification character, the character that the film is expecting the viewer to identify with as they come into this new world, is a South Asian woman. Is Naomi Scott, who had been in the Aladdin remake. Yeah. And it's like the movie does not mention that at all, because I don't think it even at any point occurred to anyone that there was anything to mention. Yeah. It's just that the performer that they got is of South Asian descent, and also one of the other angels is Black, which again, 1980 was not going to happen. It's like, Persis got turned down, and the actress Jane Kennedy also got turned down because she was Black, and you can't have a Black Charlie's Angels. That was 1980 Hollywood. Yeah. That was the logic that was used in those days. And that was what she was fighting against. She didn't want to be on Charlie's Angels, but she should have been able to be on Charlie's Angels. Of course. Yeah. And her biggest mistake was being born before her time.
That brings up the question, though we still do have a long way to go, do you think Perseus would, what would her opinion on the diversity in Hollywood now be? What do you think her thoughts on it would be?
It would be, finally, it is about damn time. Change always happens later than we think it should, but this is really how things should have been in the 1980s. And I agree. So setting aside whether or not, the timeline was fair to her in particular, I think she would be very happy with the way things are. I mean, during the writing of the book, Lily Singh got a late night talk show and became the first South Asian person, first South Asian woman to get a talk show. And again, on American television. And that would have been just unthinkable in Perseus's time. So I think she would be, again, setting aside the frustrations about the unfortunate timing of her birth, I think she'd be very happy with the way things are now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do agree that now, Hollywood is definitely diversifying. And you did make mention of Mindi Kaling and Priyanka Chopra in your book as well. The roles that they both have too, with Priyanka being in the new Inception movies, and Mindi Kaling with her many roles, including Ocean's 11 too, being quite a big film to be starring in. Perseus would have, I think, also, I agree with you, been very thrilled and said finally. And
she wanted to have the kind of media empire that Mindi Kaling has now.
Yeah,
just started her own, because she couldn't get any decent roles anywhere else. She started her own production company to make movies that she could be in that would be halfway decent, because no one else was offering her roles like that. And yeah, I honestly believe she would have wanted to be able to do what Mindi Kaling and the others are doing now. Of course, yeah. And Priyanka, as I mentioned in the book, one of her connections with Perseus is that in 1980, Perseus was the first woman of Indian heritage, South Asian woman, to present at the Academy Awards. And in 2016, Priyanka was the second.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at this from a privileged viewpoint, but I feel like from 1980 to 2016, that's a hell of a gap.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah,
That's not good.
definitely. But at least like now they are starting to diversify.
Mhm.
And like I said, with the Matrix movie that Priyanka Chopra was in, it was a big role, and somebody like Perseus would have been so thrilled,
Mhm.
especially with how diverse it's become. And I think it's beautiful that I know better late than never, but that it is happening.
Mhm.
The book does touch upon Perseus's treatment on the set of Star Trek. Can you elaborate on this and talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, so her character of Ilea is bald because Deltans, her species Deltans, are bald. Why are Deltans bald? Because Gene Roddenberry wanted to have a bald woman character.
Mhm.
And he'd been talking about that for a long time. And he had actually preemptively used a word that would get used a lot later on. He described, the character is described as startling. When he'd originally envisioned the character of Ilea as being bald, said she'll be like the most startling character you've ever seen on television. Startling because boo, she's bald. There, you're startled, I guess. But he used that particular word. And so she was willing to show that she was willing to deglam for the role. And again, how we say this, I love her for this. She bought it like a cheap bald cap and wore overalls into the audition. And that was how she got the part, because she was willing to deglam and like say, this, everyone else is all made up. She's like, this is what you're looking for. This is bald. This is what it all look like bald. And they're like, all right, let's go for it. So the problem is, oh gosh, lots of problems. So Gene Roddenberry wanted the character to be bald. And also because of reasons, halfway through the movie, the character gets murdered and is replaced by a robot. Robot who, of course, is also bald. Wouldn't have made more sense for the robot to be bald, but the Delta not to be bald? Sure. But Roddenberry just wanted to see a bald woman. More than that, he wanted to see a bald, naked woman. So he wrote in every single draft of the script that when the robot first appears, the robot is bald. Standing in a shower, standing in a sonic shower, because it's a space word, I guess. She's standing in a shower and she is naked. She is super clearly, totally naked. Perseus did not want to be naked. She went back and forth with Roddenberry on this. Roddenberry, being a man in Hollywood in 1978, said, no, you're going to be bald in it. Or sorry, you're going to be naked in it rather. And she managed to finally talk them into giving her a bodysuit. And in the end, you can't really tell whether she's naked or not, but she did not want to be. She had to fight him on this. But so yeah, that wasn't even like the worst of the indignities. When the robot first appears, in addition to being naked, since it's standing in a shower, she has to stand. Perseus herself stood in carbon dioxide vapor, which was being pumped into like this little room that she was standing in. So she was standing naked and barefoot in a freezing vapor. And so she developed pneumonia and was sick for a while because of it. But also during that day when she was standing naked in freezing vapor, that was the first day that she had to wear, for no real good plot reason, this little doohickey on her neck, this little light on her neck. And because, 1978 technology, I guess, it was like a little light with a metal backing. And because of the laws of thermodynamics, when the light turns on, the metal heats up because the energy's got to go somewhere. And it burned her. And nobody thought about that until they were actually filming the movie. They had never tested it before that on her or anyone else. It's not until she's standing naked in a cloud of freezing vapor that the thing turns on and it starts burning her flesh. When they pulled it away, it's like her skin was red. I mean, it scorched her flesh. But rather than not have her character have a piece of burning metal on her throat, which would seem to be the obvious solution when you think about it. If you have this thing where you are actively hurting, if you're actively scorching the flesh of your performer, maybe don't do that. Just a thought. No, not 1978 Hollywood. They decided instead, and only after she asked for it, she had to ask for this. They finally gave her a switch that she could hide in her sleeve, so she could turn it on and off herself. Because after about 6 or 7 seconds, it just got unbearable.
Mhm.
But she had to ask for that. She had to be the one looking out for her own, for her safety, for her basic
Mhm.
self-interest and her safety, and to not be injured, because nobody else on the set was cared about her safety. Of
Mhm.
course, her head had to be shaved every day, a couple times a day, and they had to like put on lots of layers of makeup, and those layers of makeup caused pimples because Persis was a human with skin, and that's how these
Yeah.
things work. But
Mhm.
of course, she is not a human with skin on the screen. She is a Deltan, and I guess Deltans are perfect and can't ever possibly have pimples. So she regularly, a dermatologist would come in and put a needle into her skull and inject something into her skull to keep the pimples down.
Yeah,
So yeah, she went through a lot on the
definitely.
set of that film, and none of it was necessary.
Absolutely not.
None of it. Maybe if it had been in favor of a well-written character, or even a character where most of what makes the character interesting got edited out of the film.
Mhm.
Because so much of what she had in the film that explained who Ilea was as a character got edited out, probably because they're just like, no one's gonna like the bald chick. Let's just lose out as much. This is my what I imagine the conversation was like with the editor. Just lose
Mhm.
out the bald chick. No one really
Mhm.
likes looking at her. We're just all in it for like the spaceships and all that. So lose
Yeah.
out the bald chick. And it hurt the story because important plot points were edited out when they took out the bald chick, but
Mhm.
nobody cared about that either.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody on the set of that film who had any power cared about Perseus' safety or well-being. And it I always kind of felt it, but then when I like really researched into the making of the film, it just pisses me off to this day. And
No,
again, that
absolutely.
and this is a lot of it's information about the treatment that she experienced making the film and what she went through that had been out there. People knew
Mhm.
about this. People knew that for the big climax, they had to bring in like practically like, drive-in theater lights. People knew that she was blinded for a few days because of like the bright lights that were shining into her eyes. And she was blinded because nobody told her to close her eyes, because she had been told all along, Persis, you're a robot, never blink. Robots don't blink.
Mhm.
It's established in dialogue that this robot has eye moisture, ergo, there's no reason for the robot not to blink. But they're like, you're a robot. Robots don't blink. Never close your eyes. So she kept her eyes open while this light was shining in those eyes because she'd been told
Mhm.
not to close her eyes. And nobody cared. Yeah,
I think that
nobody
just
cared about her safety.
speaks a lot to the ethics of the film industry back then, where it was more so about getting the picture out there, the movie out there,
Mhm.
at the risk of harming and putting the health of individuals at risk. From the pimples and the burning skin and the
Mhm.
blindness that she experienced are all things that could have been avoided if
Yeah.
somebody was able to take the time to say, hey, this might be a problem, and it would like harm an individual. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely horrific to hear that that's what actors back then endured, especially Perseus.
Yeah, she had no clout. She was not the
Mm.
star of the film. She was the center of the promotion for the film because
Yeah.
all they had to show in the months leading up to it was, hey, look, we've got a bald chick. You want to see this movie? You've never seen anything as crazy as a bald chick, so come see the bald chick in the film. She was the focus of the promotion, but she was not the
Mhm.
star. She had no clout. William
Mhm.
Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were the stars of the film. What they wanted, they got, and what Persis wanted was of nobody's interest but her own, and they didn't even want to hear it.
Mhm.
And the men could hold up the production as long as they wanted. Gene Roddenberry was constantly rewriting the script and causing endless delays. And it was fine because he was the big alpha male producer.
Yeah.
But it was a scandal when Persis got pneumonia from standing naked in the midst of freezing vapors.
Mhm.
And Robert Wise had to like change the shooting schedule. And she was
Yeah.
told, don't get sick. Don't, even if you're sick, come in because it'll cost the production too much money if you're out.
Mhm.
So she got in trouble for everything. And Roddenberry could just rewrite the script for days, and it was fine because he was a person and she wasn't.
Yeah. Perseus's time in Hollywood can definitely be described as one filled with discrimination and sexism.
Mhm.
No matter what she did, she was always a foreigner, seen as exotic. Why do you think she chose to remain in Hollywood and not return to Mumbai, where she could have been a much bigger star, like former Miss Asia Pacific Zinat Aman?
As Persis was not a fan of the Indian film culture either.
Mhm.
And just saying personally, one of the things I really loved about writing this book was I knew nothing about the Indian film industry, especially nothing about the Indian film industry in the 20th century. So it was really fascinating, like learning all of it through, through researching her. But she did not, she knew she could have, gone back and been in the Hindi industry and made a lot of money, especially after she made the Willoughby Conspiracy in England in 1975. She knew she could have gone back and been a huge star, but she did not like the roles she was being offered.
Yeah.
She was always the ingenue who would be the romantic interest and, sing a few songs. And in general, she had a very dim view of the films made by that industry, that they were just escapist fantasies.
Yeah.
And she was not opposed to escapist fantasies, but she wanted to do more than that. She wanted to make movies where she could actually act and do interesting things and not just, and this is one of my favorite things I discovered while making this movie, or making this book rather, and not just dance around trees. That was a metaphor that I'd never heard before I researched this film. Then it came up a lot, the idea being that like the women in the films, just, dance around trees when they're happy. And as late as the mid 90s, when she did return to India and was trying to get back into movies, a snarky gossip columnist asked her, so are you going to start dancing around trees in movies? But yeah, just that made me so happy discovering that phrase, dancing around trees. And though she did not physically dance around trees in any of her Hindi films, I can tell you that in the three that she made in the 60s while she was there, she did the twist in all three of them. In all three films, she had to do the twist.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to mid to late 80s, and she's returning to do some shot on video movies. And there's a scene in one of them in Chingora, which, as I mentioned in the book, I can't really follow the stories of a lot of the films because I'm sadly monolingual. It's like I got English and that's it, I'm out. But thankfully, the Encyclopedia of Indian Film, which was a book that I used as a primary source, the authors say in the beginning of that, we're not going to get hung up on the stories because most of these films, it's not really about the story. They have 3 different plots going, which probably never intersect. So
yes.
Okay, the people writing the encyclopedia of the Indian films don't always follow the story. So I feel a little better about not following the story myself. But so Shingora, there's a scene where her character is at a party and clearly has to be talked into doing the twist. And it's like shot from a distance, you can't hear anything, but you can see everyone else is dancing and Persis is not. And you can see someone is like, come on. And finally she starts doing the twist. And I don't know if it's mentioned in dialogue, probably not. But I was watching that, I was like, oh God, you poor thing. Even 20 years later, when you return after having quite a lot of success, when you return to the Hindi film industry, they still want you to do the twist.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. That was how she saw that film industry, that she would not be able to be the kind of performer, the kind of artist that she wanted to be. She had a creativity which was being stifled, and she genuinely believed that it would be unstifled in the Western world.
Yeah, she definitely had bigger dreams than what she felt kind of like she would have been confined to in like the Indian film industry. She wanted to go into producing movies and things like that, things that were not seen from a woman at that time, things that weren't acceptable, so to say.
Yeah, it just was not, it was not done. It was just not done in those days. And when her and Susie Coelho were both trying to make a Fulan Devi film in the late 80s, it was her last sustained bout of attention in the American press while she was making the film, or trying to make the film, because the American press was fascinated by it. It's like it was a spectacle to see these 2 exotic women duking it out over who gets to make a film about a 3rd exotic women.
Yeah.
And they're trying to do this in Hollywood. It's like, you dum-dums, you don't do that in movies. In Hollywood, men make movies.
Mhm.
Men, preferably white men, make movies in Hollywood in the 1980s,
Mhm.
and certainly not exotic women with funny accents who want to make movies about other exotic women, not in Hollywood, not in the 1980s, no.
Yeah.
That was a bad
Perseus
time.
is often compared to both Sophie Loren and Audrey Hepburn. Do you think that's a fair comparison to make?
The Sophia Loren one, definitely not. That was just them. That was just her publicist trying to find, okay, another dark-haired exotic woman, preferably one who is synonymous with sexiness.
Mhm.
And Sophia Loren was very much the big sex symbol in Italy and was buxom in a way that Perseus was not.
Mhm.
I see Audrey Hepburn a little bit more since, they can both be, charitably described as lithe.
Mhm.
They were both very thin and both had that particular kind of like, non-voluptuous ideal to them.
Mhm.
So I get where those comparisons came from, but who Perseus really wanted to be as a model, her idol was Jean Shrimpton,
Yeah.
who was a big model in the 60s. But as an actress, as a performer, as an artist, she wanted to be Jill Clayburgh,
Mhm.
who was a white American actress in the late 70s, who was best known for a film called Unmarried Woman, which, again, that tells you everything you need to know about Hollywood in the 70s, that a film about a woman who's not married is going to be, that's so shocking that it's going to be right there in the title.
Mhm.
But she wanted the kind of parts that Jill Clayburgh played. It's
Yeah.
like she saw her movies and was like, I can do that. That's what I want to do. But she was not offered Jill Clayburgh roles. She was offered, Jill Clayburgh even took off, even to toplessness herself. I mean,
Mhm.
Jill Clayburgh herself even, was topless in An Unmarried Woman, but it was still a substantial role. It was still like a meaty, dramatic role. And the nude roles that Perseus was being offered, again, not ones Jill Clayburgh would have wanted to do.
No, of course. I'm just gonna ask Brittany, have there been any audience questions? We do have about 10 minutes left, and I was wondering if any audience member wanted to ask a question to Sherilyn.
Hi, Amber. I don't see any questions
Okay.
in our Q&A portion for now, but I will definitely voice those as they come up.
Perfect. All right. Well, I still have tons of questions for you,
All right.
Sherilyn.
Go for it.
All right. If you could meet Perseus today, given all that she's been through, what advice would you give her?
Here's the thing. I look at her notes, I look at her life rather, and I'm like, no notes. Well done. I don't know that there's anything that I could tell her. I would sit at her feet and be like, I'm an empty vessel. Fill me with your wisdom. I'm ready for it. I mean, and if anything, it would be like, okay, so here's what you do. Go back in time and you have your parents wait about 30 years and to roll the dice on you, genetically speaking, because again, you were born too soon. That was your big big flaw. That was your fatal flaw. But if I would give her any advice, it would be trust your instincts. Absolutely trust her instincts, which she did. She didn't need me to tell her that, but she trusted her instincts, because I do believe her instincts proved correct. And as I write about in the book, she was briefly considered for the not great James Bond film Octopussy. Yeah. She was briefly considered for the role because the role of the lead female character, the Octopussy, sorry, I hate having to say that word, but there it is. The character was originally written to be an Indian woman, but then when they just couldn't find an Indian woman that felt right to them, I don't know why, they just didn't like any of them. They're like, you know what, Maud Adams from The Man with the Golden Gun, it's fine. That was, kid you not, the producer saw the movie on network television the night before and was like, get Maud Adams again. She's fine. We'll just have her do it again. And they were like, yeah, we'll just put a few lines into it saying she was adopted by an Indian family, and bam, there you go.
Yeah.
And so Maud Adams ended up getting the lead role in that James Bond film. And a James Bond film, 1983 or even 2022, still a pretty big deal. Those were very high profile gigs.
Yeah.
So Maud Adams, the Swedish-born Maud Adams, got the role in Octopussy that Persis had originally been considered for. It's 1983. Then in 1989, both Maud and Persis were both in the same straight-to-video film by a director and producer whose name escaped me at the moment. But that's not the point. The point of the matter is by 1989, they were both making straight-to-video movies because they weren't able to get theatrical work anymore, because they weren't stars anymore, because they were unable to sustain their careers, because Hollywood in the 1980s was a terrible, terrible, terrible place.
Yeah, definitely.
So like I said before, even if she'd taken Cat People, even if she'd done Conan the Barbarian, even if she'd gotten the role in the James Bond film, I don't think it would have made any difference. Certainly I probably still would have written this book because her career probably would have still had the same trajectory.
Yeah.
The only difference being there would have been those things that she would not have been proud of. She was able to know that she did the right thing for herself by not taking on the roles that she didn't want.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like I tell her, keep trusting your instincts. They will not fail you.
Yeah.
Are there decisions? Should she have made some different decisions? Sure, probably. But again, she trusted her instincts. She knew who she was, and she would not compromise on that. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I love her for that.
Yeah, absolutely. The type of person she was and her values for herself. She never compromised based on whatever the industry she was in was telling her to do.
Exactly.
I think she is a great role model because she never gave up what she wanted. She kept going after it. And, even though some things didn't work out for her, she kept trying and she didn't stop. And I think that is inspiring to anybody, really. Like, if you don't succeed the first time, try again.
Exactly.
Yes, I think we are coming near to the end of our time. Sherilyn, I wanted to say congratulations once again for winning the 2020.
Sorry, before we wrap up, we do actually have a question for Sherilyn. How much easier do you find it to write about topics that you have a lot of passion for versus not? I guess is the end of that question.
What I will do is try to write a book about a topic that I'm not passionate about, then get back to you and let you know how it went.
There you go.
I can't really fathom spending the time and energy on something where it's like, I write the books I want to read. And so it's like, if I'm writing a book about something I'm not interested in, it means it's a book I wouldn't want to read, and it wouldn't be worth it. It would absolutely not be worth it. The books I write are not necessarily commercial. If I was a fiction writer, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion right now, but yeah. I follow like Persis, I follow my instinct, I follow my heart, I write about the things I'm interested in, and I'm proud of all my books because they're me and they're topics that I'm passionate about. I'm glad that I got my ideas about them out into the world.
Sherilyn, I'm assuming you were a Star Trek fan previously with the publish of, I believe, your first or your second novel, right? And I have to say, I'm a little surprised about the treatment of Persis as an actress in the movie, as it doesn't really seem to align with the progressive themes in Star Trek, and especially in relation to women, because they had a lot of, main characters that were women and that held, positions of importance, right, on the ships. And can you speak a little bit more about that? I mean, there always could be more, but I guess like when we're talking about in the environment of the time period and the culture that you keep nodding to, that it could have been more progressive, right?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit more about that.
A lot of the idea of Star Trek as being this like super progressive utopian show is we want it to be that. Star Trek fans want to believe that because it had this multi-ethnic cast, and that because it was super duper progressive in the 1960s to have a Black woman in the main cast, that Star Trek was again like really progressive and forward thinking, and that Gene Roddenberry was a great humanist and great futurist to imagine this wonderland where we're all nice to each other. No, just no, none of that holds up. None of that holds up to the smell test at all. And speaking of tests, there's something called the Bechdel test, which is just a critical tool for decide. The Bechdel test is, does a film or a piece of work have two female characters who speak to each other and they're not speaking to each other about a man? If if a film does not have a scene of two female characters talking to each other and they're not talking about a man, then it fails the Bechdel test. The first piece of Star Trek content to not fail the Bechdel test is a second season episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation from 1988, in which two teenage girls are talking to each other. Now, specifically, they're alien shapeshifters who have taken the form of hot teenage girls because it's Star Trek and that's what you do on Star Trek. But still, it kind of counts. But no Star Trek property passes the Bechdel test at all until Star Trek Voyager in 1995. Between 1996 and 1995, that's how long it took. And for my money, Star Trek has been doing its best work over the past 5 years. The best content, best Star Trek content that has been produced has been first season of Star Trek Discovery onwards. And I wish I'd grown up with it. I really do. I wish that was the Star Trek that I'd grown up with.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Sherilyn. I've been deeply appreciating the ongoing work of the excavation of women's stories that has been a constant theme in this literary festival. And naturally, this session has covered themes of sexism and social justice. So I just wanted to say thank you, ladies, for this discussion, and we really appreciate it at the Arts Council. And I would be remiss, because my fiance is a huge Star Trek fan, if I didn't impart these words to everyone to live long and prosper.
And I will impart what is unfortunately Ilea's most famous line, which is, "My oath of celibacy is on record." Yeah, that's Star Trek in a nutshell. Ilea's most famous line is, "My oath of celibacy is on record." That almost says everything you need to know about Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek.
Well, thank you, DC South Asian Literary Festival, for hosting today's event. Congratulations once again, Sherilyn, for the IAW Women Award for 2022 Best Nonfiction of the Year for your book, Perseus Kambata, From Miss India to Star Trek, the Motion Picture and Beyond. Thank you, Brittany, for also joining us today and hopping on with those few questions. And our time has concluded. So it was really nice chatting with you, Sherilyn.
Likewise, Amber.
Congratulations once again, your book, amazing.
Glad you liked it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you again. Congratulations.